Terrific. Great. Well, thank you. It's a crackerjack panel, as we say back in the States. I'm delighted to have you all. Maybe, Markus, we can start with you. Now, Hitachi Energy focuses on the high voltage side of the business. Transformers, I'm sure, are a big part of your concerns, if I'm not mistaken. The world has a shortage. What are we going to do about it? There seem to be some investment challenges. People talk about supply chain challenges. When you look at the landscape of electricity and electricity growth that I outlined, there's a bottleneck that seems to require some innovative thinking. What do you propose?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And let me step back. Why do we have these bottlenecks and why do we have the things is, you just explained that we have a lot of new energy needed for the whole world. But on top of that, we will have as well a massive shift of the energy from a portfolio point of view. We expect that by 2050, 50% of the energy will be supplied by electricity, while by 2020 we had some 20%.
That's a dramatic electrification.
This is a dramatic electrification which is in front of all of us.
Right, a shift from molecules dominating to a more even mix of electrons and molecules.
Right, and why do we do that? For sure, in order to integrate the renewables, but on the other hand, to supply the electricity to heat pumps and to electric vehicles, where there is as well a massive efficiency gain. So in the end, by shifting to electricity, we need less primary energy. And with this, we have the challenge that we need to build up our grid massively. And the grid we discussed a lot about this morning about the distribution grid, meaning the close to the consumers, but as well the whole backbone, which is the high voltage grid, which we are basically working on.
The figures, people may be stunned to hear, and you'll correct me if I got this wrong, but the figures I have, the grid in Europe is on average, Western Europe, 40 years old, in France, 50 years old. I mean, it's astonishing. It's a testament to the longevity of some of the equipment, but clearly we're going to face a crisis fairly soon unless we start renovating.
So by investing into the grid, and your numbers, I cannot challenge them, but by investing into the grid, we do two things. We need to support the electrification, but as well, we need to make sure that we get the grid greener.
Right.
And by doing so, there is in the moment a huge demand for all electrical equipment, not only transformers, but also for the high voltage side, meaning the switchgear and so on. And from a transformer side point of view, it is a technology which needs a lot of investment, but it needs as well a lot of training of the people because it's manufacturing. So there is quite a shortage for the time being. On the other hand, we are working on in order to get rid of the shortage. Mm-hmm. When it comes to the high voltage side itself, the switching, you don't want as a consumer or as a population, you don't want to have these overhead lines you see around going into the city. And this is only possible to get it into the city with a much more condensed space is by using a gas which is called sulfur hexafluoride for the time being. It has been the standard of the industry forever.
It's an incredibly potent greenhouse gas.
It is the most,
thousands of times more
it is the most important greenhouse gas we have.
Yeah.
It has a global warming potential of 25,000. And if you put it into the perspective of the world, you can basically say that the whole SF6 leakage, which is predominantly used in high voltage, stands for 0.6% of the global warming. This doesn't seem to be a lot, but if you see that it's only used in high voltage equipment, it's huge. Just to give you another analogy, it is basically the same amount as 1/4 of the pollution of the overall aviation industry. So we have, as an industry and as a community, we have the push and the need to phase out SF6. Mm-hmm. And that's where our development comes into play.
Now, so, how far along have you come? I've seen, I'll tell you, I went to a trade show maybe a couple of years ago where people were already beginning to advocate alternatives are coming and, you can book your orders now. Have you cracked the code on substitutes? Are we ready to go with this?
Yes, we are. It was, as you rightly said, it was a long development, and it's really was a massive development because SF6 is, from a technical point of view, the most superior solution, apart from the greenhouse again. So we found a solution which is able to be as compact, as safe, and I think most importantly even as reliable as the SF6 solution, because nobody wants to have interruption of the energy supply. Mm-hmm. The whole society would be at risk with this one. So it is in these things, and it's has a greenhouse warming potential, which is basically taking away more than 99% of the carbon footprint of the gas. So it's a massive improvement when it comes to the global warming. But on the other hand, it's keeping the technical performance of the SF6.
Double the price?
Price is always a question of demand and supply. But as I said, it is it keeps the same size, but from a technical point of view, it is not as super good as SF6 was.
Right.
But the trade-off on the global warming.
Let me ask a question a different way. Are you doing this because regulations are forcing you to do this, you and your competitors?
Yeah.
That's the reason. There's a protocol that requires you to do this?
There are two things. There is, first of all, I think it's a duty of all of us. Secondly, for sure, there is the regulation coming. But on the other hand, we have as well customers which are not under regulation yet, which want to go to that path.
Right. Okay. That's good. So you laid the groundwork. And of course, until we can sort out the transmission system, we're going to have difficulty getting whatever kind of energy people like, whether it's green or coal or anything else. They all rely on the transmission system unless it's ultimately distributed, right, at source. And so let's turn to our next panelist, Andreas. If we can have a look at electrification. You've got a lot of experience with this. Can you tell us what has been the challenge? Have you had grid constraints or EVs flourishing where you are? Tell us a little bit of your perspective on this.
Sure. Maybe give you some context about Austrian Post Group first. So we are a classical post and parcel player, covering a region of 150 million people in CEE. Austria being our core market, but also strong in Turkey, for example. And in Austria, as the core market, we strongly push for sustainability coming from the customer perspective, but we also see it as a necessity and also as a differentiation aspect. Still, we do it usually economically, and building on that, we currently have reshaped our landscape, having 50% of our fleet already now electrified. So it just builds on what you just discussed before that. Mm-hmm. Our cold beer, if you want, is that the drivers can drive in the morning. We have the whole discussion points of optimization in the grid. We have the infrastructure set up of PVs in our depots. We have the consumption on the location. We have the charging. Potentially, there's going to be charging for long distance trucking as well in the future, which is megawatt charging then in the end.
And you've got half your fleet electrified, right? 5,000 out of 10.
5,000 out of 10,000 vehicles already.
Right.
And we're going to also complete this by 2030 in Austria, having all the fleet there. So we have all these constraints you have been discussing also in the last session.
Yeah.
And we try to optimize it for ourselves. So the key question for us is, how do we optimize the system with an algorithm and energy consumption systems that give us the best of the economics, but also safeguard that our drivers can still drive in the morning. Mm-hmm. And the key around this is the whole price point that we see in electricity being very fluctuating on the spot markets. Mm. And given that our energy consumption is electrified, coming from diesel, we are nearly there, where you just discussed before.
So the price fluctuations are a problem for you?
Yes, they are, because in Austria...
Why don't you hedge yourself with some fixed price contracts?
We do so too, but you can't price all the demand on that only.
I see. Now, I was just a couple of days ago, I was at the Port of Long Beach in Los Angeles, where there is one of the world's big shipping companies has 100 electrified trucks that replaced their entire diesel fleet, gone electric, and very, noble commitment and driven partly by regulation, and workers are generally happy without the diesel fumes. But they did complain. They said, look, it takes an hour and a half to charge. Again, these are big 18-wheeler rigs, so it takes a while to charge even at the highest voltage. And sometimes 16 trucks will come in and they're, kind of scrambling for the charge points and so on. There's some practical challenges, unless do you charge overnight, or the guys don't like waiting around so long, unlike the quick refuel with diesel. What's the experience, actual on-the-ground experience that you have?
So we have the chance to load in a longer time frame. So our drivers come back in the afternoon till the evening, and then we have the night for charging. But it depends then strongly how the technology is working, because not all vehicles are already equipped with the possibility to charge to a later point, or you have the risk of that the charging actually starts. There's still technical issues on the ground if it really works.
Right.
And then there's the whole question, of course, in the future about vehicle to grid, which is another option then, which even more complicates the whole discussion around vehicles.
So I was telling about cranky drivers that we'll always find something to complain about. Now, I think our next panelist, Okan, you've been able to deal with this problem because you have autonomous vehicles. There are no drivers, as I understand it. You have some autonomous buses in Stavanger, the oil
Norway.
capital of Norway. Tell us a little bit about that. What's your experience?
Before, just a little brief explanation of my company. Karsan is urban transportation needs provider for urban transportation mainly, and we are focused only on electric, hydrogen, and then autonomy. We have 3 areas to focus. We have electric buses in Europe. We are a new company, but we're getting global every year, I would say. But our main focus in the last 3 years is the autonomous vehicles, because we believe the urban transportation will be autonomous much more earlier than the private use. Because there is an economical need at the bottom. The driver shortage is a big problem for logistics companies and also the transport authority companies in Europe and all over the world. And because the regulations are very strict and very costly, and nobody wants to be a driver anymore, not like it before. And the number of vehicles, urban vehicles, will increase and increasing because of the urban transportation increase in the future. And it will be electric. And this economical effect, the cost of the driver mainly on urban transportation, is a big effect for the transport authorities. And they are looking for challenges, and they're looking for solutions for this challenge. And autonomous urban transportation is a very good answer to this. We believe it's going to be a good example, also a very efficient example in terms of cost.
Now, you've got projects in 12 dozen countries, 10
countries, we have
12 projects.
Let me
100,000 kilometers of driving. I mean, I see some impressive numbers. Is this
our first? We have been in the streets of Stavanger till May 2022.
Okay,
it's been in operation for and we have done more than 100,000 kilometers, and we have been carrying ticketed passengers on the designated routes in Stavanger, and this is giving us a lot of experience. And the first year we had only 1 project. In the second year we had 2 more projects. And third year we put 4. Now we will be operating also in Netherlands. Also,
give us an insight into what you've learned. What were the challenges you overcame?
The first challenge was we were afraid that there will be a big reaction, safety reaction from the customers.
Right.
But it didn't go that way. It was much more faster, the consumer confidence we gained.
So you were accepted. People accepted the technology.
It's accepted, and it's very fastly accepted, I would say.
Okay.
When we talk to we make regular surveys with the customers in the area, and we get
customers
really good experience.
Do you mean the business to B2B customer or the passengers?
No, the passengers. The passenger, because it's very important to get the exception of the passengers.
Right.
And we have been very positively surprised when we saw the results when we made these surveys. And we have been doing this regularly. Every day is going in the good way, I would say.
I see.
Because, at the end, the human is having emotions, makes mistakes, but when it's autonomous, we have no mistake. It repeats the same thing every time.
Sure.
Simply, there is no...
But let me ask you, that kind of gets a little bit at it, and maybe you've started to answer the question, but what is the problem you're trying to solve by getting rid of the driver?
The cost.
So it's an economic question.
It's an economic question.
Some people, Elon Musk makes
transport
the argument, for example, quite rightly, that humans are terrible drivers. Autonomous vehicles on almost every metric will be safer once they're accepted and regulated and on the roads and proliferating. It would be a much safer world with nothing but autonomous vehicles than allowing imperfect human beings who can be distracted, drunk, morons generally, or
reactive, I would say,
jerks driving around with attitude. But the problem is getting from one state to the next, right? And our friend Devrim from Kraken was on stage talking about the Waymo. I was in two cities with Waymos, Phoenix and San Francisco, just recently, and the attitudes of customers are very positive, but other drivers don't always like them. Among other things, I took an Uber at the airport in Phoenix, and there were 25 Waymos. It was extraordinary how many were picking up at the Phoenix airport. And the Uber driver did not like them at all. One, because it was taking her business. But secondly, the way that they drive, they're very prescribed. They go only a certain speed, and they're quite safe. And this was seen as somehow... it was just not liked by other drivers, right?
That's right.
If there's a small gap, you're supposed to cut in there, and look at this stupid Waymo blocking the way; it's not going in there. And so humans are the problem. I acknowledge that, but in real life, where there's a human society. So in practice, are you finding that it's not just the people on the bus, as it were, but the others on the road? Are you finding some challenges dealing with social acceptance?
For robo shuttles, I would not. We didn't have this problem.
Maybe you should survey the other people, not the people on the bus.
We didn't survey this on the.
Yeah.
Plus, the robo shuttles are not the same as robo taxis. Robo shuttles are public transportation. We're carrying not 2 people, 3 people. We're carrying 50 people, 100 people, with designated routes. So it doesn't have the same effect like the robo-taxis do socially, I would say.
I see. But are you willing to expand your business model, or are you going to stay within your lane?
We will be focused only on robo-shuttles. We're not going to go to the robo-taxis.
Okay. And what's your next plan of conquest? You mentioned Norway, but what other places you're going?
Now, we have been working with because the public authorities are working on the regulations, especially in Europe, to make it accredited, to give the accreditation to these type of vehicles. Because up to now, all these 10, 12 different projects are with special permissions. We don't have the general rules accepted yet, designated by the authorities. And we are working with the big authorities in Europe, and they are also trying to understand to make it in a bigger scale, large scale. After that, we want to have a big number of fleets in specific cities with regulations already established and given the accreditation by the authorities. This is our second step. And the numbers will increase. We will see that in the next, not long, maybe in 1 year, 1.5 years.
Great. Well, that's a promise. We're going to come and check in with you in a year and a half. Great. So, Nina, thank you for joining us. We've heard a little bit from your colleague, of course. Devrim gave us an overview of what Kraken's up to. But you're in charge of transformation. Which really makes me wonder what he's in charge of, right? But I think we'll take that up with him at the coffee break. So transformation at a company that's already committed in a sense to transforming electricity. What is it exactly that you look after? And if you can, we've drawn a thread from power coming from generation, transmission, through electrification to ultimately autonomy vehicles. So I want you to come to the question of vehicle to grid, sort of bring it back. How do we bring vehicles back? Energy to the grid. But before that, maybe you can just tell us, what does transformation mean, and what do you do?
Absolutely. So I like to think of the work that we do in sort of my part of Kraken, as we go and we work with utilities, with energy companies mainly, to enable them to play the role in the transition that they are theoretically capable of playing. So what does that mean? To enable flexibility at large scale, at mass scale, like bringing it from away from just sort of the eco geeks and into people who just care about cold beers and hot showers. You really need utilities who are the sort of the interconnector between consumers and our electricity system to be offering the tariffs, the products, the optimization that end consumers will use. Now, the problem is that across the world, most utilities and most energy companies struggle with with their tech stack to actually be able to do this. So, if you want to go and actually use the millions of data points that we're getting from smart meters and from electric assets, you need a really good system that has one unified space for all your data. Mm-hmm. Now, the problem is that most utilities, they'll have this spaghetti soup architecture of somewhere between 20 and 60 different software systems that are like cobbled together with bad, unreliable APIs, and makes it really hard to combine your meter readings with your billing engine, with your CRM system to actually offer innovative products. So back to your question, what does transformation mean? What we do with the energy companies that we work with is that we go in and we work on a sort of a business level transformation of both the technology, their software systems, but also what does that then mean for the way your business model, like your operating model, how your customer service or how your data team or your marketing team will work.
Give it a concrete example that brings it to life. We get the picture. Multiple systems, people don't know what's going on, no dashboard. One of the first things I was taught as a young junior reporter at The Economist ages ago was an old aphorism in business. If only Siemens knew what Siemens knows, right? And maybe that's still true. I don't know if anyone from Siemens can correct me about this, but the idea that there's so much complexity within companies that, you don't really even know what you already know. Give us an example of how what you're trying to do solves that problem.
So one example of one of the old legacy utilities we've worked with, not in the UK, but out in the world. So what would happen when you called up is that the first person who picked up your phone call, I'm calling in I have a question about my bill, I want to change the tariff I'm on, whatnot. So I call in. The first person who picks up notes down my request, and then in this company they had runners who would then pick up the note and run into the central system where they would fax the question down to a sort of a back office who had access to the mainframe where like their system had information about my account. So another
That's
runner.
where the last fax machine in England is. I was wondering where it was. Okay, yeah.
So another runner would pick up the note, run down to somebody who had a computer that actually could answer my question, and then run back up and somebody would call me back up. So like if you imagine that system, like the slowness, the size, like the rigidity makes it really, really hard to even think about innovation, but also great customer service, right? The majority of cases when they called back up, the first response back was, your case is delayed. Like that was the majority of cases. Now, if that is the fundamental problem if that's one problem you're trying to grapple with as an energy company, how do you have the bandwidth? How do you have the capacity to think about offering the great customer service that is necessary to create the trust that Deborah mentioned, or to create the innovative products that our energy system needs?
What's the answer? How?
You move to Kraken.
I see. So buy our software. You'll be very successful. Is that it?
No. The answer is that you you need as a utility today,
Right.
in a world where you're not just getting 4 meter readings per year from each household, but you're getting 300 meter readings per day, where your customers have a radically different expectation of their experience.
Just to challenge you a little bit, what you're offering is a formula for data deluge, right? We've gone through waves of consultants telling companies you need to have, a digital revolution. I can one consulting company who may or may not be represented here today is literally every 2 years they have a new paradigm for digital renovation, right? They've been going for 30 years renovating. It was the internet and the IoT, and it was, with this big data, it was one after another, and constantly that state of chaos and confusion has been good for the consultants, but less so for the companies themselves necessarily. And so, what is it, and I know you'll have an answer for this, but what is it that helps make sense of the data deluge that is being created? Going from a few points a week to hundreds of points of data a day is great if you can help me make sense of that data. Now, is the answer, as the answer for everything these days is AI? AI will do this. Is it some sort of machine learning offering? Is it LLMs? Can you just, because that's been the constant problem is companies don't know how to deal with the result of all the sensors or whatever are put in place. Digital twins. I saw my first digital twin 20 years ago, and now they're still trotting out digital twins saying this will solve all your problems. I just want to know what's smarter about today's digital twin than the one from 20 years ago.
No, it's such a good question. We're seeing that the energy companies we work with have traditionally had a lot of this capacity outsourced. Like you would use consultants to manage all of your tech.
Yeah.
What we see with the companies we work with is that the post transformation or whatnot, their data teams get a lot bigger. So you need you need to have the technology that gives you easy access to the data, rather than having a bunch of different systems where things are not connected. It's much better if you can have fewer with sort of joint data lakes. Now that's not enough. Like having the data gets you nowhere. You need to have the capacity to use the data to get insight, and that's a capability issue within like utilities, right? You have to build out these data teams to actually be able to use the data for anything.
And again, just because we're talking a lot about AI and ML, I imagine that is a part of how you manage this, right? Being able to deal with this in real time and to make sense of it for your team, it has to be a pretty sophisticated offering that the AI simplifies. Am I right?
Yeah, 100%. But I think that's part of it. But it's not the whole story. We talk a lot about AI, and AI is important and plays a really important role in optimization and in sort of, prediction.
Right.
But in order to be able to deal with the data deluge, you actually need to have the capabilities in-house to not just think that like large language models will solve the whole problem.
Fair enough. I'm glad you didn't oversell the AI part of it. I'm going to ask for the audience to collect a couple of questions for our panelists, but I'm going to come back and maybe follow up a little bit here. Anyone else that wants to follow up on how AI is transforming your own business or not, if it's creating problems for your business, I'd welcome just to stay on the theme a little bit, since we want to talk a little bit about AI during the course of today from the energy perspective. Anyone seeing transformative effects of AI in your business or problematic effects?
Maybe not the answer you're expecting, but AI is having huge loads, peak loads in specific parts of the world.
Right.
So it has a huge impact on the grid. And
but in nodes, as you say, Virginia, Ireland,
right,
we can look at specific places, not in the aggregate numbers. But in those places, it's a real problem.
If you look at, into a utility like Dominion, which is one of the largest in US, they have 10 gigawatts of load only because of AI.
Right.
It's right in Virginia. It's close to DC. It's right, but it's still massive in these things.
Yeah.
And the investment going into AI to come, we just saw the beginning, is so massive that it has to be fast, and it's impacting the way how we build the grid massively because of the ripple effect of having these peak centers.
Are you finding that the solution, again, you're at the high voltage end of things, transformers, bringing power from far away DC cables and so on, that this is relevant for the problem of where the world is now going is increasingly bring your own power. That's sort of the euphemism in the big tech world. And people are, in effect, because of the delays of permitting, NIMBYism and so on, in effect building their large energy plant next door, if they can, to where their data center is. This means you may not be able to locate next to the Pentagon in Virginia, where you can't get permission to build massive power plants or solar farms, but they might go to West Texas, where they have both massive amounts of solar as well as gas connections, so they can arbitrage between the two. Are you beginning to see that sort of thing, which might not be so good for your business because they're not transmitting the power?
So you see as well the example of 3 Mile Island.
Yeah.
We're basically starting the nuclear power plant again in order to supply the data center. Just to be clear, also this because of the energy needed in the data center.
Right, this is Microsoft that's basically
Yeah.
made that deal to bring back an abandoned plant.
But the energy is so high, it's also high voltage. So in the end of the day, the whole equipment is high voltage.
I see. So even there, so whoever wins,
are in any-
whoever wins, you win. That's what I'm hearing. You wanted to jump in, and then I want to come to the audience. Yes.
Just what you said, but I think that the decentralized approach you can have there, optimization on the depot level for our business, for example, is something that can help you with the ripple effect. Because as we optimize behind the meter, if you want, you can limit the charge, the spikes for the grid. And so that's kind of what we try to push for, to combine all these assets I described before and to optimize it there decentrally on this spot behind the meter. And this helps probably the networks then in the end, as it's the most stable curve that they are seeing. And it helps also our costs because you don't have these peaks and spikes you have to cover as well on the meter.
I think I saw a hand shoot up earlier. I see a gentleman near the back. Let's get a microphone there. And we have time for a couple of more questions after that. If people want, we can come towards the front over there and then here. Please identify yourself, sir.
Thanks very much. I'm Dean Cooper. I'm the Global Energy Lead for WWF.
The Wrestling Federation? Fantastic.
That's not the wrestling, not the World Wrestling Federation these days, huh? No, so our focus is 100% renewable energy, faster, greener, fairer. But one of the critical elements is the cost. Now, I just wanted to come to Markus on the SF6 issue. It seems like an essential move. Okay, we're still moving to carbon dioxide, but it's really such an improvement. But you get the question of cost, and that's a concern. Now, are we then we're reliant on regulation, or can we educate the customers so they will accept a shorter term cost, because the longer term cost is going to be enormous if we don't have a clear up. And just an add-on to that is, do you think there's any scope for decentralized grids? So rather than having centralized grid expansion, we more have mini grids, particularly in sparsely populated countries or less dense.
Yeah.
So just on those two, thanks.
Okay. Maybe the first question is clearly for you.
It's a good question. The topic here is, also in the beginning, every technology needs to mature. So needs to mature also, you need to generate in the end of the day economies of scale. We are just in the beginning of the technology. And in the beginning, it is adding costs. But going forward, also because of the economies of scale, the learning, also maybe being smarter and working together with the utilities, we will have a substantial reduction of the cost going forward. So from that point of view, I think it's in the beginning, it's something you need to go about the first hill, but later on, this is going to at least to cushion itself quite a lot.
Do you want to say a word on microgrids? And maybe Nina can jump in on this one too, distributed.
On the microgrids, this is something which we have been thinking, or I think the whole industry has been thinking for quite some time. The microgrids, especially in not dense population, is a very good way in starting something up. However, we see in the last years less and less demand compared to what we were projecting, because the focus for the time being is now expanding the high voltage grid in order to get the electrification done.
Nina, you want to jump in?
The experience we've had with energy communities have been quite small scale pilot work, but thinking about sort of at the very smallest scale of a household, we're seeing sort of one of our customers looking at how to optimize one home fully, such that you can remove all energy bills entirely. So if you've got one house that has solar panels, battery, all electric, heat pump, no gas, this utility is then offering to go in and essentially say, like, if you allow us to control the electrons in your home when we charge the battery from the grid, when we sell it back to the grid, and so forth, we can guarantee no energy bills for at least 5 years. And that's where it gets really interesting to think about, like, how do we get regular people on board, right? Are they interested in sacrificing the pounds in their wallet for like the grander scheme of things? I think the last years have seen that that's not the case. So we in sort of the industry need to go in and find more innovative solutions where we can expand the win set.
So there are examples. If you look at Australia, Western Australia, you see massive microgrids. Tesla Powerwalls and other kinds of technologies are aggregated. We see in Germany, this is a significant trend in California. So there's certain markets where either because of policy or because of local conditions, we do see this advancing. And I would say, keep your eyes open. We do see one of the challenges is interoperability and communications. We do see an effort led by the Electric Power Research Institute, EPRI, which is a sort of research body for global utilities that's promoting the equivalent of a Bluetooth standard for distributed equipment. Right now, EVs can't talk to each other, never mind talk to the grid effectively, or never mind with your fuel cell or micro generator or your heat pump, etc., solar. You get the idea. And so the equivalent of something like a Bluetooth standard being advocated and ultimately adopted could go a long way towards making this idea of microgrids much more effective. Let's go to someone here. Did I see a hand on this side?
Good morning. Elias Westerdahl from the Center for Synchronous Leadership. Thank you very much for this. As touched upon, some of the main issues with EVs are around mileage and charging time. So there have been talks about inductive wireless charging in roads. Will that ever be a reality, or is it like a really nice sci-fi idea?
Yeah, is it only for tea kettles, or could we have EVs too? Want to jump in? Andreas, are you looking at this?
For us, it's not really a question. The problem of mileage isn't there. So we have business cases for our fleet. I mean, in the beginning, the economic environment in Austria was favorable in terms of subsidies and so on, also for electric vehicles. But we also see a business case for electric vehicles there now. And we don't need the loading. We don't have a loading time problem. So we have it there for hours. And it's more the question how we optimize the hours rather than have it even on the road charged. So our use case is a perfect one. We have like tours of 100 kilometers plus minus, depending on which city or countryside, and sometimes a bit more. But in the end, usually you can fit the vehicle, you can find vehicles for the purpose, and you don't have this question, to be fair. But this is our case.
Is there a question near the back I saw? Did I see a hand over here before? Yes, up here. Thank you.
Hi, Phil Spring from IBM. Kind of a big question, building on what Vijay was just talking about. What does the panel see as the key blockers to electrification? Is it to do with government alignment? Is it to do with business models downstream? Just kind of broadly, what do you see as the main issues that we need to resolve?
Who wants to jump in on that?
I can say a little bit about it. I'm actually very optimistic for electrification in Europe following recent the recent high volatility. We've had a problem with lack of government commitment in recent years, whether that be heat pumps in Germany or heat pumps in Italy, or commitments to hydrogen pipelines, which then have these like upstream effects that once the political commitment to actually doing the doing falls away, that has massive impacts on industry. But I'm quite optimistic because when we look around the world, who has an interest in electrifying? The US less so. They have a country that's on top of oil and gas. But Europe really does. Like we don't have enough gas and oil to run our own economy. And if we want to be independent, which really is the movement of the time, there is really only one way, which is to run on electricity. We can be self-sufficient on electrons, but we can't on gas and oil. And so I think by a shift of the narrative towards more securitization rather than just net zero, I think that mood will shift in Europe.
Great. Any last question from the floor? Yes, a eager question in the front, and then we'll close out for the next round.
It's really just very quickly to ask how quantum computing will factor into your ideas.
They're looking at you like you're from Mars.
There was a whole conference on quantum computing in the city last year, which was fascinating.
And then there have been some recent breakthroughs announced as well from IBM and elsewhere. But
it's going to take time.
Let's give it a 10-year window. In 10 years' time, do you think quantum may have an effect on some of your thinking, or is it not within your range of planning?
For autonomous driving, I think definitely it's going to affect, because the processing issue is, in terms of energy consumption and cost, is the highest part of the world, autonomous world, and quantum computing is going to help things to be in a better shape. Yeah, reduce costs and reduce processing times, etc.
What do you think on the grid management side? Is it too far afield for you to think about at this time? I mean, that'd be the next transformation, wouldn't
it? I think so. The time scale is the real question. And I think we are in a real hurry on the questions of electrification and changing our energy system. And so quantum will play its own role. I'm still trying to wrap my head around even understanding how 1 and 0 can exist at the same time. But it's another one of those technologies that could always be 20 years away.
Yeah. There is another possibility that the technology will advance, but maybe in the utility sector, it will advance more slowly. It has historically, the utility sector has been slow to adopt new technologies, reinvesting less historically as a share of revenues into R&D or innovation than most other big industries, in part because of how it's been regulated. We normally regulated utilities, compensating them more to redecorate the chairman's office than to take a flyer on untested technologies, right? And to keep the lights on and just really, be forgotten. That's sort of how the world looked at utilities until much more recently. But as we move towards competitive markets and now more innovative markets, and the double challenge I talked about, both the decarbonation challenge as well as the energy crisis, energy demand challenge, it's asking a lot more from the industry. And so proven technologies that can be brought to scale that are still 20 years out of date for the utilities would be a good start. The next quantum leap may have to wait, would be my prediction. But as we promised you at this opening of this conference today, no stone will be left unturned. Even quantum has made its appearance today at a technology conference. So with that, please join me in thanking my panelists.